Picture this. An ancient building in ancient Rome in the 4th century BC. You are surrounded by chairs, books are spilling off the shelves, and your quill is placed neatly next to your roll of paper, just waiting to be used. Your teacher's rattling off math equations invented by your mom's friend Pythagoras, and all you can think about is what you're going to do when you finish class. Now back to present-day reality. And while all of our quills have been replaced by laptops, this scenario doesn't sound completely different to what we have or will experience at some point during our schooling careers. From the time we are toddlers, we enter the world of education, and for the next 18 to 22 years, from school to university, we grow up, learn, and evolve within this environment. Yet, this environment does not seem to change with us. Many education systems, as we know them, are incredibly traditional institutions with minimal open-mindedness and incredibly strict and rigid curriculums. So by no means am I saying learning about the Pythagorean theorem is irrelevant or unhelpful, but rather I would like to propose that education systems need to change with the times in order to stimulate students' growth, mindset, and overall ability to learn. If this occurs, we won't only produce individuals with a developed intellect, but more than that, and all those who pass through the education system will prove to be creative thinkers, problem solvers, and enlightened and curious minds. When looking at this topic, there are 3 core concepts I want to discuss. Firstly, to explore the ways in which the education system needs to change and prepare us for what a dynamic future has to offer. Secondly, to propose how new ideas and global events need to be incorporated into the curriculum. And lastly, to sound a warning that the lack of progression in school system has affected intake in traditional schools and will indisputably continue to do so. Education systems should educate, not teach. From the time we enter a classroom, we are conditioned to jump onto the hamster wheel of continuously moving towards the next thing, whether it's addition to multiplication, punctuation to essay writing, or world civ to AP World History. And while finding a flow of learning and continuously progressing is important, I believe the meaning of education is always be growing, always be learning, and always be asking questions. And over time, the meaning of education has become lost, and nowadays, children attend school to just cross the box. School has become a caregiving place for working parents and a chore that children and teenagers are dragging themselves through, just to move on to university and thereafter the world of work. And while this natural cycle of life is what it is, I believe school needs to be a place where students go to expand their minds, not simply their knowledge. Where we can learn lessons from historic events and not just historical facts, so that we can be inspired to create history ourselves. As the future generation, we have an incredibly important role to play to ensure that future generations are educated rather as a choice than a requirement. Our knowledge sources are continuously changing after all. Over the past months, the use of the artificial intelligence website ChatGPT has exploded. Many argue that this phenomenon could truly threaten the education system, but those who are willing to be open-minded should embrace it as a learning tool to equip students to distill a corpus of knowledge at a rapid rate and enhance the way we think about the world. If educators and teachers accept this rather than discourage it, their overall contribution to their children's learning journeys will be much more imaginative and less predictable. Teachers need to learn to understand it and make it work for them, not against them. Because after all, artificial intelligence is not replacing teachers, it's enriching them. One of the most famous gender equality activists and the late US Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, "The court ought not to be affected by the weather of the day, but will be by the climate of the era." And I believe education systems need to do just this, reflect the climate of the era. Education systems need to be relentlessly relevant. Growing up in present-day society, one of the most important skills and areas of knowledge is understanding and acknowledging global events and new innovations. Global events are dynamic, influential, and persuasive in impact, and I believe that all schools should make it compulsory to take at least one class that stimulates discussion and debate regarding what is happening in the world around us. Classes our school teaches Classes our school uses as electives, such as MUN, public speaking, and global issues, are some of the best classes students can take in order to learn core skills about people, situations, and what is happening around us that doesn't revolve around us. I have found that the gaps within the education system stems from the restrictiveness and lack of diversity within the curriculum, which has led many students to drop out. Education systems tend to refer to these individuals as anti-establishment. Apple founder Steve Jobs is perhaps one of the most well-known college dropouts. Jobs' ideas and imagination influenced one of the most successful and impactful technology innovations of the modern era. I believe, and by no means am I promoting dropping out of college or university, actually quite the opposite. I'm a huge advocate for education, but education systems where the likes of the Steve Jobs of this world are supported and encouraged by the environment that they are in, and that the place they are in does not force unnecessary conformity and rigid mindsets. If education systems stimulate, train, and inspire all students, we will find ways to combat worldwide problems while using the skills we have learned in math, science, English, and history. It's a case of adapt or die. Unlike many traditional schools, AISCT and other international schools like us have already begun supporting and encouraging the exploration of personal ideas and beliefs, as well as the attendance of thought-provoking classes, all in the hopes to help us find our passions and help us craft a vision of how we will impact humanity and our planet constructively. Recently, there's been a huge influx within international schools, and I believe this is a result of the diverse curriculum, diversity of people, and wide-ranging perspectives one can find within this environment. As someone who went to an all-girls traditional South African school for 12 years before moving to AISCT, I can comfortably say that the two environments are completely different and contrasting. As someone who loves project-based, collaborative, and thought-provoking work, I find AISCT to be a breath of fresh air and a step in the right direction to make sure that we are pursuing education in a democratic, not dictatorial way. However, I do believe schools need to radiate a belief of learning for growth and impact rather than for a diploma, because this will cause a huge mindset shift within all students. In this sort of environment, my peers around the world and I will shift to be intrinsically motivated for continuously true learning, improvement, and personal growth. Not purely to excel and achieve mastery in our own talents and passions, but to use these in creative and imaginative ways to enrich life for all. So after everything I've said, if there are just 3 things you take away, here they are. First, educate, don't teach. Ignite learning for growth and contribution. Embrace technology and AI tools as compelling tools to enhance learning, not replace it. Remain relentlessly relevant. Include global events and innovations so that students of all ages and backgrounds are inspired to combat these worldwide issues and find solutions and even preventions to make our world much more peaceful and respectful. And lastly, bubbles never last. We need all schools, whether traditional, international, and modern, to burst out their restrictive spaces and pursue and push critical thinking, as well as drastically diversify the curriculum, so that all students can feel embraced in an outward-facing learning environment. American educator and philosopher Robert N. Hutchins summed up my view in one line when he said, "The object of education is to prepare the young to educate themselves throughout their lives. And that, everyone, is perhaps the critical idea we must never stop spreading."